Test, test.
There we go.
Now it went.
Okay. We've got a full group.
Ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, excellent. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the June 9th Utahlake Technical Committee meeting. Apologies for not being able to be there in person, and appreciate Eric and Sam for dealing with the technical difficulties. But feeling that mixed media is going to be a little bit harder than actually the Zoom platform that I've been using for the last year. So appreciate you bearing with me. I guess we'll start and do a short round of introductions. I'm Scott Daly with the Division of Water Quality. Eric, do you mind sending it around the room, and if folks could introduce themselves and who they represent on the technical committee or members of the public?
Sure. Yeah, we'll start over at Russ and then work our way around to this side.
Russ Franklin with the June Center Recovery Implementation Program.
Mike Rao, Central Utah Water Conservancy District.
Justine Marshall, I oversee vineyards and the spores from water improvement.
Okay. So you're with the Division of Water Quality?
No, Vineyard City.
Oh, you're the city side of that. Okay.
I'm Soren Simonson, the Executive Director of the Water.
Anders Blake with Winded City.
Eric Ellis, Utahleycommission.
Josh Holt, State Parks.
Jake Nostrom, Springville City Wastewater and Stormwater.
Jordan Loy, Lloyd Fisheries. Bryce Jackson, Spanish Fork Wastewater.
Mike Clark, Spanish Fork.
And Jesse Stewart, I'm with Utahlake Water Users.
Could I get a couple repeats there? Sorry, I'm trying to track things all for our roles. I got Jordan down. Also, we got Josh. Jake with which agency?
Springville City.
That's right, Jake. We added you on with Brad, right? If I remember correctly. Yes. Okay, that's right. So we've got Springville here. Okay, and then Jordan. Bryce first, Spanish Fork. Bryce, what's your last name? Jackson. Thank you. And Mike Clark with Spanish Fork as well?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you for that. I appreciate that, everybody. I think I got everybody else. Yeah.
Okay. And then
Great. Is that everyone in the room?
now we have two others on the call with you. So maybe Morgan first.
Hi, this is Morgan Faulkner with Forestry Fire and State Lands. I'm hoping to be in person for the next one, but I have a meeting right after this. So thanks for doing a little bit virtual too.
Sure. Sarah?
Sarah Carroll with the City of Saratoga Springs Planning Department.
Thanks for being with us.
Okay. Excellent. Well, thank you all. We'll jump right in with approval of the technical committee meeting minutes from February 17th. Does anyone have any comments or discussion on the meeting minutes? I did notice in going through them that there may be an edit needed to the date. I think the copy I have says December 9th.
That has been corrected on the latest iteration.
I'll move to approve the corrected minutes from February 17th.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Okay.
Okay, so we have a
And
motion and a second. Okay, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
unanimous.
Okay, great. Well, thanks all. Moving right along, we'll have a presentation on low impact development by Spanish Fork City. Bryce Jackson will tee us up with an introduction and turn it over to Michael Clark, both with Spanish Fork.
Do you have an actual presentation? I don't think that I have a dongle to tie into your Apple. If you, yeah, you can share it with me.
Yeah, I can just share it with you.
you just gonna email it?
Yeah, I don't even know.
Eric@Utahleycommission.org.
I could sit in your seat, or if we set up the remote, they could just stand. Behind you.
Okay, so
Well, the only issue is the only microphone is facing Eric, unfortunately. I epically failed to do something.
okay, so how do I make that big? Share screen. I'm not sure how to pull it up.
Maybe drag it to that screen and then share that screen. I think I saw that.
Oh, yeah. Close that. Shrink that. And then is there like a presentation mode on it or something?
Yeah.
Next to the yellow share button. To the left. There you go.
You want to close out your downloads bar at the bottom.
Okay.
All right, and then
Thanks
I'll
for working
present.
on that.
No, you're good. Present screen. All right, can everyone see it?
Yeah, they're seeing what we see on the screen up front.
Yeah, just want to make sure before I go too far. All right, so I'm Michael Clark. I work with Corey. I'm in the engineering department. Corey I now have Corey's job. Corey was the development engineer. Would review developments, work on LID, master plans, SWIP inspections, all that stuff. And then he moved to the sewer department, and then I got hired. So Corey knows my job very well. And he's actually given this presentation before, or a similar presentation. So low impact development, we'll just start, and if you have questions, I'll try and let's see if I can, I guess those online, go ahead and interrupt me, and those here, you can also interrupt me. So the state's been doing low impact development since 2014. Here and there, when we started hearing about the states wanting to move towards some sort of retention, keeping the water on site and letting it percolate into the ground rather than it just flowing through storm drain pipes and out to the lake. The idea is we want to keep the tree as a resource rather than something we want to get rid of, something we want to use. That's part of it. The other part is to also treat the water, more of a pre-development type look at it rather than treating it as a nuisance that we make worse by developing, right? There's significantly more runoff when you have a developed lot than a farm field. So let's go to, all right, so gotta start with the water cycle, right? There's a couple of them here, but the idea is that the condensation or the precipitation comes on the ground. A lot of it soaks into the ground. Think of a farmer's field, soaks in. Some of it runs off through a stream. Then the rest of it goes into groundwater, and the groundwater makes it out to the water body as well. Typically, there's a decent amount of treatment. There's not a lot of oils or other pollutants that get into it because there's not a lot of people around or vehicles. So what happens with development, you have much less infiltration because you have parking lots, you have buildings, other things that don't let water through. So it's concentrated into a specific area, not treated, sent out through pipes rather than, well, I guess it'd be pipes or ditches and out to the river. So the idea is no rain means the streams dry up, but when it rains, the streams flood. Again, this is kind of a post-development look, and I think this is how typical development has been in the past. The idea of what the state wants to move to and what we've adopted is trying to find ways to retain as much on site, whether it's pervious pavements, ways to collect water and put it into the root ball of trees, green roofs, and other ways to keep the water where it landed rather than having it run off. So runoff and discharge closer to natural water cycle, pollution removed by treatments such as wetlands and bioretention, biofiltration. So anyway, that's kind of the premise of it. We've come a long way since back in the popular science in 1963. We had here's how you get rid of your car motor oil. You would dig a hole filled with gravel, and then dump it out of your pan, and that was treatment. That was what you did, rather than just throwing it out, I guess, on the ground. I don't know. Then the EPA, the state, trickling down to municipalities, and then developer contractor and our city projects, everyone has rules now that we have to follow. So that same oil containment, I guess you could call it, is now looking a little more like this. So I think there's definitely some progression, some good changes, some that bring a lot of challenges with them. But overall, the principle is there. I think it's a good move. It's just now trying to implement it into every scenario that we all come into contact with. But the ultimate idea is to protect the waterways, protect the water bodies like Utahlake, and then so it'll increase like recreation, everything, as well as public health. So DEQ has a bunch of resources. Obviously, they're trying to push it, and they have mandates that are out for cities that they have to follow as of March of last year for stuff like this. So instead of it coming down this road, say when it rained, and coming into an inlet box and then being piped out to a ditch out to the lake, which then has all the pollutants. The idea is, well, let's make something beautiful in the middle of it. Let's have the water run off through these spills into the middle here and collect it, have the roots uptake nutrients that come from with the stormwater, and all the water stays here. Recharges aquifers, have a good benefit. This is the conference center for the LDS Church in Salt Lake. You have rainwater harvesting. There's lots of different ways to retain that water on site. So we took this as an opportunity. Again, this is before I was there, but this is still there that we've built as an opportunity to try it out. How does this work? Again, there's no guidance on how to do this. There's a couple places in Minnesota and places that tried it, but nowhere in a desert landscape that really had something we could follow. So we thought, well, here's a really empty, ugly park strip that no one has front yards on, so let's give this one a shot. We don't put them in front yards of people's houses above ground, by the way, because we don't want residents to take care of them because they won't. So we thought, all right, let's give this a try. So what they did is they put in our tanks, so it looks like a milk crate. It's a ACF product, and they put it down below the flow line of the curb. And then they covered it with fabric, put rock on it, and then planted bushes and trees and such on top of it.
Those boxes are all the way along the entire thing?
Yeah. Yep. So they run the length of it, and then the idea is there's an inlet box, well, a curb cut, we'll go with this one. There's a curb cut, the water flows down the curb into the swale here, and then it goes into through the rock and into the top of the R tank and flow down. Again, don't think too much of this because we've gotten a way better way to do it, but this is our first go at it.
What's the address of this?
Volunteer Drive and 5th South. Couple lessons learned. Curb cuts allow large debris into the swales and built up a lot of sediment. Coke cups, or Coke cans, drink cups, napkins, leaves, everything washes into those. So the idea of this, I mean, it's fine. It just looks really ugly. And then once you have rock there, the silt and everything sticks to the rock and becomes this black, nasty thing. And it's really hard to clean up rock. So every year, 2 or 3, you have to go in and pull out all the rock, put everything back in. You have to cut the fabric if it's all sediment, like it's has sedimentation on it. Anyway, so some issues there. Maintenance was high with the original vegetation, as you can see. This is what it did look like, all these different vegetation things, but our Parks Department went and cleaned it out because too much to deal with the rocks and keeping it alive and everything. So this is a little more simplified. But the underground storage worked good. The soils percolated, went into the ground. We didn't have any flooding issues. So that was good. So we've adjusted and adapted since then. So there's now a couple products. Again, you remember the milk crate, kind of looks like this from the side. Another ACO, I think ACO is the name. Anyway, they have a Storm Bricks product. It's a very similar idea. They're a lot stronger vertically than these R tanks are. So we've had this become our standard. These are approved equals. There's also Storm Tech, or Prinsco has a product. There's a bunch of similar products now. But the idea is, let's get it underground. Let's get it out of sight, out of mind. Let's have the top be something a little more simple, grass that can be mowed, or in the case of a resident's front yard, they don't even know it's there, right? I mean, it's 4 or 5 feet deep. Even if they're digging a tree, they're not going to hit it. They just plant grass and they just go along their way as if nothing's under there. Yeah. Go ahead.
What type of, do you see increased water usage in your grass because the water is going down into your detention?
No, because the R tanks on top of it, there's between 3 or so feet of water or soil before you get to your topsoil. And I mean, unless you have really sandy soils, it's usually been compacted pretty good. So there's really not a lot vertically through the grass other than like your front yard. Yeah. So again, the same idea. Instead of a curb cut, we have it come into an inlet box. I'll show you a better view in a second, but it fills up the inlet box, comes through this trash guard, through this pipe back into the R tanks, Storm Bricks, Storm Tech, whatever brand you want to go with.
Do those tanks convey the water in high flow situations?
Yes, so we'll go through the size of storm for sure. So this is a little video, similar product. They're all somewhat similar, but the idea is maybe a little better shown in a video because I like visuals. So you dig a hole. This might be pre or post development. You line it with fabric to keep sorry, let me pause this. So you put the fabric down so you don't have migration of the fines, right? Any fines in there will start plugging up the fabric, or sorry, plugging up the R tanks. So you put a leveling bed so you can lock them together. Most of these products have some sort of locking mechanisms. They're like Legos. So actually, this is a huge application. This isn't everywhere. So you put fabric on top of the structure, backfill with rocks, then you can pour asphalt on top of it. Yeah, it's a 7-layer beam dip is what it ends up looking like, right? Anyway, so that's how you kind of build it. And then it's going to rain here. It's going to be beautiful. I don't know how well this is getting to you guys online, but yep. Oh yeah, way too wide of gaps. So the water comes in, it fills the inlet box. You have some sort of a grate. I'll talk through a few of those options here in a second, but anyway. So then it keeps all the big stuff out, right? So if you have cans and napkins and everything in here, the percolation ability is pretty diminished. So. So collected in here, sizing this, the EPA, the states say an 80th percentile storm. We don't do that. We do much higher than that for a reason I'll talk about in a minute. You build it for whatever size your rules say, and then with a minimum of it's like 0.4 inches for the site, whatever that adds up being for the size of site. And then if you have good percolation, it goes into the soils and goes into your aquifers. If it doesn't, then this is more of a detention basin, meaning the water doesn't stay here. There's an outlet pipe that kind of leaks out to then a river or something else. But the idea is it's been screened. It will have gone through some sort of pre-treatment, but really there's not a lot of chemical treatment. It's more of the suspended stuff. has a chance to settle out and then it leaves. But
Does the outlet go to a main trunk, or does it just go to more like a septic field source where it's just draining into the ground?
so if it will drain, we don't have any outlet pipe. So if this is good soil, we just let it sit and percolate
Like, is
out.
that in and of itself is
Yeah.
perforated or something like that?
Yeah, so the outsides of this is 100%, like you saw the milk crate thing with big old holes in it. You wrap that in fabric so the water's pushing out and it percolates into the soil. So our east side and middle of town percolates fantastic. We build the thing, do a geotech report and say, yep, this thing will percolate out. So just like when it rains on a highway, county road, let's say, goes off to the shoulder and there's weeds and other stuff along the side and it's gravel, and then it just gradually makes its way into the ground. Similar principle, but it's collected into these chambers and then it just percolates out.
So it basically doesn't have that pipe on the bottom, right?
Yeah, that's 99% of ours. We very rarely, if it's bad soils, like it's clay or the groundwater's high, we don't even usually install these just because it's kind of a waste of money. If the groundwater's gonna come fill these up anyway, then we do more of a surface type basin. That's more on the west end where, you know, towards the lake. But on our east end stuff, this is typically what we do. Outlet pipes are only used if there is not groundwater, but bad soils. And so it's like, well, we need you to detain this, but you don't want to lose a parking lot above it to a grass detention basin. So go ahead and put it underground and it'll fill up just like a above ground basin would, but it has an outlet pipe that then just goes out to either a ditch or another pipe. But they have to detain it so we don't have to build these monster pipes. So here's a storm bricks example. So they call them a UIC well. We actually have to register them with the state, each one of them, because they're technically putting water into the ground. So we have miles and miles and miles of this stuff. So you put the chambers in. They're very porous. Obviously, these columns are hollow, and they fill up with water too. So I think it's like a 94%, 96%, something like that, of the entire volume is can be filled with water. There's very little plastic versus how much is open space. Wrap with fabric, and then this is at a park we built last year. And then you have these cleaning ports. So you can put a jet nozzle through here, push it to the end, and then pull it back, and then suction it out. Let's, for sake of time, we'll kind of skip these, but this is just showing you run them along the streets. So you collect it in, run a pipe back, and then run it either way. So here's again that one I said we have a better view. So water comes in, fills up just like you saw in that video. You have this trash rack, and then it comes into the LID. Let's keep going. Storm chambers. We reduced the width of our roads as well. So they're narrower streets, which is a public. They don't like it. They like wide streets, but for us, it's a lot less impervious area. If we can have more planter strip than street, that's definitely a good thing.
Slow traffic.
It does slow traffic, which they complain like, I can't drive. I can't go very fast down my road, and I'm so close to these parked cars on the side. Like, sounds like it's working. That's what we want to have happen, is you to drive the speed limit. Another thing we've done is utilizing wetland areas like this for the ponds. This is a 48-inch pipe that comes out from Lowe's. Again, this is a lot of sedge, a lot of materials that uptake hydrocarbons and other chemicals that we don't want. So we have a collection area in these baskets, Gabion baskets. And then it filters through the rocks. And then we can suction this out. Comes and fills this basin, and then it gradually overflows out through some more wetland areas now to the Canyon Creek is what it's called. So again, it looked like this. It still kind of does. We're still working on it, but make beneficial use of something that would never be built on anyway. Another creek area. So the idea is not everything's underground, but we can still try and make use of the uptake and cleaning the water out.
Have you seen any growth of like cattails? Of course, we have Phragmites. Have you seen any of that kind of growth?
Yeah, this is all cattails out here, and I'm sure there's Phragmites all mixed in there too. But we have it in here. This is super alkali, salty, nasty stuff. We're surprised anything grows out here, but yeah, there's some out here. So the Utah City Engineers Association looked at a bunch of different options of how to build these in various scenarios. They met a bunch of professional engineers and kind of came up with a bunch. There's a link at the end. I have a QR code you can scan to get this presentation, but they have a bunch of standards that you can then put in your own standards for how to do certain types of these wet swells, dry swells, the ones with the trees where it puts the water right at the roots. There's a couple of those. So next question we get is a lot of maintenance. How do you maintain these things? Again, this is a little more on the city side than maybe some of the folks here, but that's a question we got, like what if these plug up? So we went a couple years ago and BYU did a capstone study. So seniors in college came and we dug up our tanks that had been in for 2 or 3 years and said, how bad is it? You know, there are leaves all over, like what made it in? And before we used a snout, which, sorry, let me jump back here, which is not this, it's solid all the way through. And then there's just a gap at the bottom. The idea is that floatables will sit here like oils and Coke cans and everything else. And then when it rains, the clean water of sorts would come up and through. So the water comes in, the volume that's displaced, the floatables float, right? And then the other stuff comes through. The issue is it rains so infrequent that the places where they were selling this was places that rained all the time. So there's constantly this flow where this dries up. If it doesn't rain for a few weeks, it doesn't. So then at the bottom of these, you have this 2-foot layer or a foot layer of Coke cans and bottles. So when that big flush of water comes in that we get, the goalie washers, it would just push all those cups up and through and through the hole. So yeah, we use these. So small holes at the bottom, looks like a cheese grater, kind of bigger holes at the top.
And no void at the bottom.
Correct.
Also a cheese grater.
Yeah, I haven't even looked on the bottom of them. I think it's solid.
Oh.
It's solid on the bottom. I think you know, but anyway, so we use this now, and the reason we use that, it's relatively new. Oh, I do have the pictures here. Is this study. So we did the snouts, and there was a bunch of leaves in the first 5 or 6 feet of it, and then the pipe that leads from the inlet box to our tanks. And obviously we don't want leaves in there because they break down and then it'll plug the fabric. So regardless though, when you have 300 feet and only 5 feet had some leaves in it over 3 years, the amount of maintenance is pretty negligible. Because what happens, even if the whole bottom layer is silted in, it fills up and then you have an inch, the entire 300 foot on both sides of the R tank. And then even if that plugged up, you have the next foot, because these are 2+ feet high. And so it's got a really long life before you'd have to dig it all up, assuming that we clean out the inlet boxes and do maintenance out there, we don't have to do this. Anyway, so yeah, here's the snouts. Sorry, I forgot I put this in here. So the floatables float. The problem is if there's no water in here for a while, the flush then puts it all through, and then we get this in the R tanks. So here's the trash guard. We like this one. All right, let's talk a different phase of this. So how big a storm do we plan? How do we size these things? So our master plan was done before 2014, so in 2011. It had pipes that were 96 inches. So we had 8 and 9 foot pipes spec'd out at the bottom of the system. And if you've ever tried to put one of those in, they're very expensive. And then some of them went under railroad tracks, which it's kind of impossible to do that because stormwater is shallow by inherently, right? Sewer's deep, stormwater is shallow. So boring under, like you can't bore under a railroad track with a 9 foot pipe. Like it just doesn't happen. Really expensive. Our impact fees would have been pretty astronomical to try and pay for some of these big regional pipes. So that's why in 2014, when we heard, hey, the state might be going towards a retain on site type thing, we said, let's change our whole master plan. What happens if anywhere that has good soils and low groundwater, so good sites, what happens if we retain this little bit, I said the 0.4 inches. It didn't really change a whole lot because in a big storm, there's like 2 inches of water. You can knock off the 0.4, but the peak is still there. That big wash is still there. So it really didn't help our master plan to only plan for a small amount. So we said, well, why don't we plan for a big storm, 25-year storm? Oh, that might be really expensive on site, but it also got rid of our 96-inch pipes. Now we have 36-inch pipes, small pipes. So the impact fee would go down. So maybe it'd be a wash because you don't have to put in the big pipes, but you do have to put more on your site. So that's what we did. So here is a frequency curve, right? So the 80th percentile, I think it's like 0.46 or something. So what the challenge it gave us, and I'm an engineer, I did modeling stuff like this. So the challenge I had when this first came out was, how do you design a storm drain system to handle anything bigger than the blue? When you plan on vertical. You plan a 10-year storm, any duration, right? You have a long storm, so there's not a high peak, but a lot of volume. Or these 5-minute storms, you have really high intensity, but it's so short, there's not a lot of volume generated. And so you plan vertical for all your master plans in your cities, but the blue is what the state said to follow. So we said, all right, we're going to just go with the 25-year. That way we can master plan to it, we can model it, we can have very predictable benefits, where if you did the 80th percentile, you not only have to do the LID, but then you also have to put in the big pipes anyway. So we said, let's just solve the problem by doing more on the one end and just doing the 25-year storm. I am time.
I think we're good.
Okay. If I go too long, please tell me. So anyway, that's kind of a more in-depth technical thing, but that's why we went the 25 years. So any Costco that comes, we say how much is generated in a 25-year storm for any duration, and you got to plan for the worst case, which on any site, it's usually a 30 or 60-minute storm. They put the R tanks in, it percolates into the ground. We don't have to worry about that site running off until it reaches above a 25-year storm. So for our master plan's sake, we almost X them off of the map. They don't exist because they're going to retain it. Now you might have a huge 100-year storm, but our roads are also designed to handle the 100-year storm. And a couple other facilities we have, but 25-year storms pretty, there's about 3 a year that hit that. And then maybe 1 year that might be above that. So we had the question, and this is the biggest pushback from a lot of the cities, is what if it's infeasible? Like in Vineyard, there's really no gravelly soil with no groundwater in it, right? It's all clay and lots of groundwater. This is one, I won't tell the relation, but someone prominent person's sibling started pushing dirt out onto this hillside to make his backyard bigger. And it rained and it was not compacted or anything. So then it washed down and gave us a foot of mud on the county road out here. And the high school students drive the road. It was a big mess. So yeah, clay and high groundwater and LID doesn't work. And slopes, that's another challenge on the hillsides. So it's kind of a lot here. There's a link at the bottom to help document, but basically where the 25-year doesn't work, we say, well, we still want to, the state says we still have to do LID. Well, Kaysville and some other cities said, well, how do we do this? Well, they said we have to put it in. So the engineer spec'd out some LID, they put it in and it filled the full of water because it was groundwater. And they said, well, we did it. So they put a lot of money into something that really didn't work. So we're hearing that, we're like, well, that doesn't work. We don't want to waste money or have the contractor waste money. So how do we do this? So we said, well, what if we said, you still got to detain a 10-year because if not, you're going to flood out someone. We design our pipes for a 10-year storm. You have to at least detain that. And you can do that above ground. Groundwater is irrelevant. Clay soils are irrelevant. You have to detain. But how do we still fulfill the LID requirement? So we said, well, what if we took the amount, the cost difference, if this is a cost, detaining is cheaper. What if we took the cost difference, and there's this more in depth and it's kind of technical, but if we took that difference and we had them pay it to the city and we log it with the state, and then we go somewhere where it does work, that's already developed, that floods or has some other deficiency, and we put LID or those storm chambers there. So for a site, they might have a $200,000 25-year cost. they put in 100,000 worth of detention, but then they give us a $50,000 check. So they're ahead. We take the 50,000 from all the different entities that can't do LID, and then we go to our cemetery and we put in LID there, where it's kind of the top of the system. It runs through a bunch of old irrigation lines and it floods out. It's not a very good system. Well, if we put the LID there with that money? So we took that to the state and they thought that was great. So we now collect, we call the LID bank fee of sorts. It ends up being the same cost or cheaper than what the developer would have spent anyway. We're actually putting it to beneficial use rather than putting LID where it really doesn't work. Another question we get is, how do we make sure that Costco, we'll just throw them out, how do we make sure they maintain their system? Like, how do we make sure their landscaping doesn't change? Or how do we make sure they're cleaning out their boxes so the water can actually get to their chambers? So we have a long-term stormwater management plan, or an LTSMP. Basically, it's an agreement that they have to do when they get their building permit that says we will maintain our system. Super easy. Whoever they hire can fill this out. They should get a link. And this is the agreement. This isn't what they have to fill out, but basically it just says you'll follow your plans. That's all it says. And then each quarter they get on, they fill out like 4-question jot form, and then we have a SWIP manager that goes through and makes sure that people are filling it out. So I mean, it's a legal document. We have every right to, one of the things says if you don't do it, if you don't fill this out or you don't actually clean stuff, then we'll go out, we'll do it, and we'll send you an invoice, and we can collect on that. So there's some teeth there, and it's not a lot of ask. It's not a lot of huge oversight. It's just, you want this to work too, right? You don't want to flood your system or flood your parking lot. Just sweep your streets, sweep your streets, clean out your inlet boxes, etc. Okay, I don't know why I'm on time, but that's the quick version. So you can scan that with your phone if you want this presentation, or I can send it to Eric and he can send it out.
Well, you already sent it to me, so we'll just plan to share it.
Okay, perfect.
Well, great. Thanks so much for that presentation. Are there any questions from folks in the room? Okay. Anyone else online? All right. Well, thank you so much, Michael. We appreciate it. Okay, we'll now transition to progress on lake-related projects. Turn it over to Eric.
Okay. Thanks, Scott. Let me just pull up. Oh yeah. So this one, let me just pull up my presentation here. Huh.
You want to say Carol speak to 4H video?
Yeah.
Just need to drag it to those.
All right. Okay, so finish that. Sarah's on the line. Sarah, did you have an update for us on the Amanda Lane Trail project?
Yeah, sure. So they did halt it. I don't know the exact reasons, but they are going to start again in July, and then they'll still be able to finish by the contract deadline of October 15th.
Awesome. So October 15th, they finish this year?
Yeah, they're still projected to finish October 15th.
Right.
They needed it to dry out. I know that sounds weird because it's so dry this year, but they needed drier conditions, so they'll start again in July.
Okay. I mean, from what I remember, there's quite a bit of storm water that gets that area wet. It isn't always even lake related water, so I could see why midsummer would be a better time to work in there. Cool. We're excited about that trail segment. So thanks for the update. Anything else in Saratoga that we should be aware of? Any word on the marina enhancement project, the extra jetty and swim beach and so forth?
Oh, I didn't ask Jeremy about that. I know it's still in the works though.
Okay. Well, I'll be meeting with some of the Saratoga staff here in the next couple weeks, so I can get an update for the group at our next meeting.
Okay.
As far as the question that we're asking about is the Tourism Tax Advisory Board funding through the county. American Fork, do we have any American Fork representatives here today? That project I know is kind of, it's the furthest one out, and so we don't necessarily have, I don't have an update from American Fork yet. I know that we're working with them on kind of making sure that we stay on task, but they're kind of 2023 for their project. And then the vineyard portion, do we have a vineyard person here?
Just to.
Oh, I was looking in the wrong direction.
So we interviewed, we put out an RFP for designers to help us create our vision. We've interviewed 5 of the applicants, 8 applicants. They're still doing a review process, reviewing financials and stuff before they make the final selection. So that's moving forward. Edge Homes with their lakefront project, their condominium and townhome project, they're completing trails, both HOA maintained trails and also improving, completing that segment that we had a gap in from our shores development to county trail that had been existing.
Yep.
That'll include a box culvert bridge that'll go over the outfall line, Lake Bottom Canal and our stormwater. So that'll make that connection there. And then we're just continuing work, on the beach cleaning. I hope to get down in the Walkara Way area and start doing some improvements for beach access areas there also.
Awesome. I guess the only thing I'd add is Vineyard was kind enough to let the commission sit in on those reviews for the RFPs, and it's exciting to see that the city is going to do a master plan of the entire shoreline on the city that will kind of work well together. So we're excited to see how that rolls out. Okay, Scott.
Okay. Thanks, Eric. So transition to Utahlake water quality study update. Give me just a second to pull up my presentation. Okay, Eric, I think you might need to enable my screen sharing.
You should be able to now.
There we go. Okay. Okay, excellent. Are y'all seeing my screen?
Not yet. Let me see if I can drag. What if I go like this? Okay, yes, we are now.
Okay. Great. All right, well, I'll just jump into it. It's been some time since I think we've talked with this group about where we're at with Utahlake water quality study. I think Eric briefly talked about some of the current events when we met back in February. But most of this year, we had a little bit of a pause at the beginning of the year as we transitioned to a new facilitation team. That group, Peak Facilitation Group, is up and running, and we've had a series of steering committee and science panel events over the last couple months, picked up our meeting frequency and are kind of marching right along to implement some of our bigger projects. And so if you remember, all those projects are really kind of designed around reporting out on or answering a series of charge questions that were provided to the science panel by the steering committee. And those are basically categorized into 4 areas: the historical condition of the lake, how the lake currently functions with the nutrients it has and the current ecological condition, identification of information that is needed to develop nutrient criteria, and then the kind of global feasibility question of, is there an achievable improvement that can be made under current management constraints? And so these, these projects kind of fall within this timeline highlighted here. The current work or the criteria development work is highlighted in those blue boxes, where the implementation oriented tasks are highlighted in the green boxes along the timeline. And so, in terms of criteria development, we're slightly behind schedule, but not that far behind. We're currently implementing our strategic research plan. We're nearing completion of the framework, and we're starting into that work for actually assessing data and information for developing the criteria. And we're also beginning the implementation planning component, which will kick off here in the next little while. One of the major initiatives, I guess, of last year's work that was kind of needed so that we can continue progressing in this way was the development of management goals. This was a task that was undertaken by the steering committee. And if you recall, the Utahlake uses here generally categorized as aquatic life, recreation, and agriculture. So the basic 3 uses of Utahlake water. In addition, this project has to address any downstream needs. So if there is a specific use requirement, Utahlake water needs to meet that use for downstream uses in the Jordan River system. So steering committee spent some significant time discussing management goals, developed a final approved set of management goals just before the holiday break over winter. And then with our transition and facilitation team, we've now picked up that work to continue forward and carry that information into what we're calling the Numeric Nutrient Criteria Framework. And so this will be a document, or is a document, that's currently in draft form, under review by the steering committee, and likely nearing approval, I think. But this document describes the approaches that will be taken for assessing the empirical data we have. So all of the water chemistry, all of the sediment data, all of the inflow data, taking that in, assessing the relationships between, say, nutrients and chlorophyll, and nutrients and harmful algal blooms, to help develop stressor response relationships that will put us in the, give us the information we need for developing the criteria. And so there are several lines of evidence for doing this. There's a reference-based approach. So we have some studies ongoing that will give us some information on what the historic condition of the lake was, provide some context for, how conditions have changed over time and in response to which stressors, which will be important for interpreting that information. The empirical part is what I just described. We have a set of water quality models, both for the lake and the watershed, that will be applied to develop some of these lines of evidence. And then, we can utilize some of the existing scientific literature in similar shallow lake systems where we don't have a full, complete, say we have a specific data gap in Utahlake, we can borrow from scientific literature as appropriate. So all of these lines of evidence are described in that framework document, in addition to, how we'll assess uncertainty and risk probability and those kinds of issues. So if we end up with a particular number, how likely is it that the management goals that were identified will be met? How often will they be exceeded or not met? What is the likelihood of that happening? So all of those things are kind of covered in that framework document. So steering committee has provided some comments, I think is probably the last round, and we're cleaning those up right now. And we should be in a position to seek or have a request for adoption of that document here within the next week or so. Okay, so research updates, that was kind of the primary focus of the steering committee. The science panel's work has been, focused in, as I mentioned before, on all of those charge questions. Those charge questions, those 4 general ones, were broken into very specific, detailed questions about interactions within the lake and water chemistry and so forth. And, after defining those questions, the science panel assessed the information that they had available to them already, and then developed a priority list of research projects that would fill any data gaps that were identified in that process. And so that's what this list of research ideas is here. So the science panel compiled this list, prioritized the list based on the importance of that particular piece of information for answering the charge questions, developing criteria, and reporting out on feasibility of the project. And this notates, this is all documented in the strategic research plan document. And then we have some notation here about which projects are underway, the information of whether it's addressed or partially addressed. And then there's a few other projects that we are implementing right now to kind of complete the remaining tasks that are not shaded on this graph. And I'll take any questions along the way, so feel free to jump in. Okay, so specifically diving into some of those projects, this is the Paleolimnologic Study that's being led by Janice Brainey at Utah State University. This is the one that will inform that reference condition assessment. And so basically what they've done is gone through the lake in 4 or 5 locations, taken these detailed sediment cores, they've preserved the cores and are taking samples at various depths throughout the sediment layers within those cores to provide an accurate date of the sediments. So tell us, whether they occurred before settlement, after settlement, along the timeline. And so they're using some interesting techniques here like carbon dating, cesium dating, plutonium dating, and some other methods there. They're also looking at DNA for phytoplankton and pigments, so they can actually see how much chlorophyll was in the sediments in that prehistoric condition, how it's changed through time, how the diatom community has changed. So this information will be useful, helpful for putting the current lake in context with what it used to be and for identifying the potential stressors. This, we hope, this project's had some, like a lot of other things, have had some significant delays due to COVID. Janice and her team relies on a number of laboratories throughout the country and in Canada to process some of these samples. And so laboratories have been closed and for a significant period of time. And so has resulted in a little bit of a slowdown in the results. But things are starting to open back up, results are coming in. And so I think we're still on track to complete the project towards the, early to midwinter this year. Sediment water nutrient interactions. This was Dr. Ramesh Goel and Greg Carling. This actually wrapped up in May of last year. I've probably talked to this group about it. So the goal here was to take some sediment cores and see how those cores would respond to various lake water conditions. And so they had a sediment core, it had some overlying water in the core. And in the laboratory, they do these experiments where they would reduce the nutrient content of the overlying water, increase the nutrient content in other cores, and then see how the sediments responded. So what they found is that if you reduce nutrient concentrations, the sediments will release some nutrients into the water column. If you increase beyond a certain point, then the water column will drop nutrients into the sediments. And so the idea here was to try to figure out where that balancing point is with how nutrients in the water and the sediments will respond to one another. Pretty interesting study. These results are available now in a final report to the science panel. And I'll talk a little bit later how all of these will be wrapped up into kind of responding to those charge questions.
Scott, I have a quick question.
Sure.
Is the idea behind that you set a nutrient concentration that's equal to or at a equilibrium with that which is in the sediment, or is it to speculate on how long it would take at a reduced amount or a reduced concentration in the water column to diminish or reduce the amount that's concentrated in the sediment?
Yeah, I think it's probably both.
Oh.
It will be useful for both purposes. And yeah, with this one, it does definitely speak to the lag time recovery component, right? So if you do What they weren't able to do, right, these experiments only occurred over a couple week period of time. And the equilibrium, equilibrium part of the experiment wasn't quite as productive as we thought it would be. But we had hoped that, you could see how long it would take for those nutrients to kind of reach that new stable state so that the sediments were no longer putting nutrients out. And they do have an estimate of that in a report. And so it'll be useful in terms of the lag time recovery. But yeah, I think it'll be valuable for that particular component, and, as well as a piece of information that could be useful for identifying a potential range of nutrient lake conditions. So anyway, does that answer both of your questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
It did.
Okay, phosphorus binding. This is a new study, and this is intended to target what I guess we've talked about it before here, the issue in Utahlake where we have a lot of calcium carbonate available in the water column, and so that calcium is pretty efficient at binding phosphorus and sequestering that phosphorus to the sediments in a way that's thought to permanently remove phosphorus from the water column, and it would no longer be available for algal production. Utahlake is unique somewhat in that way, and it could be a factor that would potentially increase or speed up the timeline for lake recovery. And so the science panel is interested in kind of quantifying those relationships, determining what chemical factors are at play, whether it be high, low pH, how anoxic sediment conditions can affect the release of phosphorus from that calcium phosphorus bind. And so this will be important in a couple of ways. One, for the modeling, if this calcium phosphorus interaction is as important as we think it is, we'll need to make some enhancements to the computer model simulations to be able to accurately account for those relationships in the lake. Again, it speaks to lag time recovery and the phosphorus scavenging part of it. So there are other things that are included in this study beyond just calcite. Iron, for example, is an important one, and there are other mineral formations, other minerals potentially forming with phosphorus, and we're looking to investigate, which those are, what their relative magnitude is. Is calcium making up 60% of that phosphorus scavenging? What percentage is iron? So we're looking at those, and then the controlling factors. So this is work that's just being initiated now. Dr. Lamont at BYU and Greg Carling, Steve Nelson, they'll be out on the lake probably collecting their first set of chemistry and sediment core samples within the next couple weeks. They'll do that several times over this field season, and then we'll take the winter months to kind of wrap up those results and report out. And we think this project will wrap up early to mid-spring next year. Okay, littoral sediments. This one, we're still working on trying to identify a contractor for this. We have some options in play now. We'll report out on who we select here in probably a couple weeks, but the science panel is charged with, understanding the impacts of lake elevation, water elevation on nutrients and harmful algal blooms, right? So we all know the lake goes up and down significantly within each year and across several years. And the graphic here just shows lake elevation as it's changed in Provo Bay, minimum, maximum elevation for each year from 2015 to 20. So there's quite a bit of movement, and Provo Bay is shallow, and it goes from wet to dry to exceptionally wet to dry again on an annual basis. And so it's thought that continual wetting and drying of sediments might actually change the chemistry of phosphorus and nitrogen in the sediments and potentially make it more mobile, so that when dry sediments are re-wet, there may be a surge of nutrients coming back into the water column. And so this study will target characterizing those relationships, magnitudes, to understand the overall effect of that mechanism, and in comparison to the external loading that's coming in from other parts of the watershed, and also from the internal loading of the sediments coming from those areas that are constantly wet. Mass balance project. So this is a current project that's being led by the Science Panel's technical consultant. And this, the charge here was to calculate how much phosphorus, nitrogen, and carbon is coming in from the watershed. So from the various sources, whether it be stormwater runoff or natural background sources from the watershed, wastewater treatment plants and agriculture and all of those other things. We're looking, the point here is to come up with a total estimate of the loading coming in for each of these elements into the lake. Compare that to what we think is happening in the sediments, so how much in total is coming out of the sediments. And those are helpful for future mechanistic modeling that we'll talk about here on the next slide, but also for characterizing lake recovery time and other components. And so the graphic here I know is somewhat hard to read, but in the PDF I'll send around it'll be a little clearer. We've taken existing data and publications on Utahlake and pulled in the rates and magnitudes of these transitions or fluxes that are occurring in the sediments and water column in between the two. And so we're now working on wrapping that up and coming up with an internal balance and a external mass balance. The lake modeling task, this has been ongoing. This was one that was under development by the University of Utah through an EPA STAR grant for the last several years. They've wrapped up their work and handed that over to the science panel. And we just wrapped up a procurement process to select a technical consultant to carry on these models, further develop them for application of criteria setting and implementation planning. And so we're just now getting those folks on board and hope to be making these modifications to the models, redoing the calibrations, accounting for the phosphorus scavenging and all of that stuff over the next year or so, and then have a final product for that coming up for the criteria development. There's some other ongoing work that's useful to the project in terms of answering those charge questions. One in particular is being led by the Timpanogos Special Service District. And they're doing what's called a mesocosm approach, where they put out these 10-meter diameter kind of enclosures in the lake that block off an exchange of lake water from outside the enclosure to inside the enclosure, and that'll allow them to conduct a bunch of different experiments to test out some of the driving factors that are important here. So, for example, in one, they could put carp and then see how much carp turbation contributes to the nutrient cycling, and then compare that to another enclosure that doesn't have carp, and then an enclosure that has carp and macrophytes compared to one that only has macrophytes. And they can look at water chemistry interactions in those mesocosms. And so there's a whole series of experiments that they're currently designing. They're currently working on their design at the moment, and I think that should be available within the next couple months. But this will, as I understand it, is a pilot project for this year, kind of a proof of concept. They'll do some experiments, produce some results, and then have an opportunity in the following years to make modifications, enhance those experiments, do some additional experiments. So it's a pretty interesting study, pretty valuable, I'm sure, for the project. Okay, and so kind of upcoming work, you know, all of those projects are going on. We're bringing on our modeling group right now. We need to continue working through those to have kind of the full picture of data and information for the project. But in the time being, you know, we would like to take, or the science panel is taking an initial assessment of where we stand with the charge question. So we have a whole lot of information coming in. We have preliminary information from a lot of the studies that aren't completed. We have the initial models that were developed by the University of Utah, a whole bunch of other information and data that's been collected over the last several years. And so we're going to take stock of that information, highlight what we've learned, highlight the existing data gaps, and then make a report out on that information to the steering committee. And so we're just now kicking off that work. We have a science panel meeting tomorrow, actually, where we'll start discussing this, and we'll probably hopefully have something to share with the steering committee over the next couple of months. The steering committee, there's a couple things going on here as well. We're going to engage them in a recreation use survey to help define some of the recreational use endpoints. And so this is still under design. I'm not quite sure how this will play out, but in other places this has been done where you can survey recreationists, show them a range of different pictures of water quality conditions. One example of that would be from a clear blue lake transitioning to green, more green, and excessively green lake, and then you can ask the user, which condition they prefer. And then each of those photos has corresponding water chemistry with it. And so then you can come up with a number based on those responses. It's a pretty effective technique. It doesn't come without complications, but it's one that the steering committee is looking to employ to gain some additional information about recreational behavior and water quality in the lake. And then the last two elements here are related to the implementation component. So the steering committee wants to get a jump start on, developing scenarios for how they might get to meeting any of the management goals that we talked about before, how that compares to the current condition in the lake. And then there'll be a series of scenarios around that. And so the steering committee will start framing up those scenarios here. This is just a conceptual diagram of what that might look like from current condition of the lake with no future change in management, implementing just the 2015 DWQ phosphorus rule, or some range of different nutrient reduction scenarios. And so the steering committee will start doing that work here this summer. And then we're also going to jump into the implementation planning. So then that is, what if we do nutrient reductions? What if nutrient reductions are needed to meet those goals? What do those look like? Where do the reductions come from? How much did they cost? Are they feasible? All of those kinds of questions. So with that.
Got real question. Quick question.
So, hey, when you do your questionnaire, I mean, obviously everybody wants a clear, beautiful, clean lake. Are you going to attach dollar amounts to that to show the potential cost to achieve those different levels of lake, quality?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So we do want to. Sorry, Eric.
I was just going to ask if I could clarify a point. It isn't to. Their job is not to select their favorite, rather it's for them to go down that list until a break point where they'd no longer be interested in, like at the point where it would impact their likelihood of using that water. And so you're not asking them, do you want it to look like Lake Tahoe? Because they'd all say yes.
Right.
You're saying go down this list and would you recreate here? Yes. Would you recreate here? Yes. Until it's like, no, this is too little. Or too poor.
Wouldn't that decision be based also on how much out of pocket it might cost them? I mean, if you're going to say, hey, it's going to cost me $100 a month to get a level that I really would like to recreate at, but for $50 a month or $25 a month, I could live with this level.
Scott, any response to the feasibility portion?
Yeah, this is a really difficult question to answer. So I don't think we would be permitted to ask that question in the survey context, but those questions will be asked as part of the implementation planning. We're working through this with EPA right now, but we have some pretty strict guidelines that we're negotiating with them to introduce this feasibility and cost question into the process. But we have a little flexibility to allow cost to be included in the formulation of the criteria. So for the rec survey example, if you did ask, this one costs $50, this one costs $60 and this other one $100, I don't know that that information would actually be allowable for determination of the criteria based on the EPA rules. And again, something we're in negotiations with EPA on how we do this now, because the state of Utah has legislation that requires us to assess the feasibility and cost with any criteria that we develop. And so we're trying to kind of meet both of those demands. And the way that we're thinking about it now is that the criteria development piece, which the recreation user survey would be used for, would be conducted in a parallel but separate track from the implementation planning part of it, where you would then assess the cost for getting there and the feasibility for getting there. So I guess the short answer is that eventually, Eric, are you still there? Eric, can you hear me in there?
I can hear you, Scott, but I seem to have lost him.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure if the room hearing me?
That I couldn't tell you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it was, Reed, are you online?
Yeah, I'm online.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, it kind of glitched for a second and I think we may have lost the room.
Scott, we're back.
Okay, thanks, Eric. Not sure how much of that you heard, but the short answer is we're going to do both in parallel tracks, but absolutely will assess, the feasibility and cost question. Sorry, the audio was jumbled there. I didn't get any of that.
Hello?
Hey, Scott, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
What was Reed's question?
Hold on, I'm gonna step out in the hallway. Eric was just asking what a question from Reed Price was, what you were answering.
Okay. Can you say that again, Sam?
Eric was just asking what question Reed had asked you.
Okay, so you didn't, it seems that you've cut out when I jumped in. So the question was whether or not recreation user surveys would be asked how much it cost, right? Is that the one you're referring to when they were evaluating the photos?
Not hearing anything, Scott?
Okay, I am now.
Okay.
Sorry, it's cutting in and out.
If it sounds like you might have answered the question. So you're going to do two tracks. You're going to evaluate cost, but also be asking questions that can kind of pull that kind of information out of the recreational survey.
That's right. Yeah, but the recreation survey probably won't be allowed to ask questions of cost, at least now. I think there's probably an opportunity or will be necessary to follow up with a separate survey to ask those questions specifically.
Okay.
Eric, I didn't ask him a question. I could hear him clearly, but for some reason you dropped off. So I was just telling him that I could hear him, but you guys didn't.
Got it.
Sorry.
Scott, did you have more on your presentation?
No, just a conclusion slide. I was just going to point out that we have some new information on the the project website, utahlake.deq.utah.gov. Specifically, there's a bunch of all the documents that have been developed by the process so far are posted for reference. But otherwise, I'm done.
Okay.
Copies of the slides and presented. We can make
Yeah.
sure you have this.
All right. Scott, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
So,
So are we ready to transition then into the next segment?
yes.
Okay, take it away, Russ.
All right. So just to give you guys a little bit of an update, just kind of a mid-spring, early summer update on the June suckers. Number one, if anybody wants them, we do have our newsletter for this year. I've got copies over here, not only in the newsletter for the June sucker recovery program, but also for the Provo River Delta. So if anybody would like a hard copy, I've got PDFs that I can send out, or I can send it to Sam or to Eric, and they can email them out. But we do have a recovery report, message from the director and things like that. Just kind of basically what I'm going to go over a little bit, but it's a PDF version. You guys can print off, hand out, or do whatever. They are on our websites. So right now we're trending down on the June sucker spawning. Just to give you guys some updates on the numbers. So take this, we had a very good year, but it's not the total, how do I want to put it? You can't put all your eggs in one basket, but it is a very encouraging year. We do stock June suckers every year, so we would hope that we would see the numbers increasing every year. But this year, total individuals on the Provo River as of yesterday was just over 4,200 individuals, which is probably one of the largest years we've ever seen. But there are other variables. It's a low flow year. We didn't have any issues with the readers. So the possibility of detection is gone up. Like I said, we're stocking quite a few every year, so we would hope that we would see them coming up. Not every year do June suckers spawn. So all in all, with those, things mentioned, it was a very good year. And this trend just shows you the flows through the Provo River versus the spawning run. And right now, I just went by the river. Visually, you can see about 3 or 4 here and there. They're in small groups. They're not as good as it was last week, or especially as you can see on the trends here. Hobble Creek this year, we're trying to get down to the bottom of this to see what's going on. We want to see it might be the ones that we're seeing on the far right of the graph. They might be juvenile males, and they're just looking anywhere to spawn, and they keep coming up. Look at the numbers though. The bars are pretty tall, but if you look at the scaling, it's not very many compared to last year. We've had a total of just over 100 unique individuals go through Hobble Creek, with a maximum right around 15 to 16 on the highest of the days. So it's in compared to Provo, where the highest day is just over 600. So although the bars, look pretty impressive, having 15 still hovering right around there, even though the flows have dropped off, doesn't necessarily mean, what it would mean on the Provo River. But those are the numbers for this year so far. So encouraging. So just over 4,300 spawning June suckers this year, which is probably the largest, if not one of the largest years we've ever had. Carp removal update. We've got Jordan here, but this year, due to if any of you guys attended our annual assessment meeting, we talked about that we want to maintain the carp biomass, or don't let it get any larger, so if not reduce it more. So we're going to be using a smaller mesh size on the nets. We do have lower lake levels this year, and we're hoping between the lower lake levels and the smaller mesh size that we're going to be able to remove more juvenile fish, and that'll help maintain or exceed put us below the threshold where we want to be for the carp biomass for Utahlake. But so far it's just the early preliminary, and and so we still don't know exactly how well it's going to be throughout the year. But this summer hopefully with these, things going for us, it will be a decent carp removal year, but, we'll wait and see on that. Just a few updates on the Provo River Delta. It's moving right along. About the only thing you can say is that drought and, without any rain, they can excavate, and they're excavating and they're moving right along on there. So they are.
Don't like to publicly express excitement about the drought.
But
It's really helping.
oh yeah, yeah. And anybody that does anything with construction knows that, when you don't have a lot of water and other things causing any issues, yeah, they can just keep moving right along. And so they're
Silver lining.
yeah, exactly. If you want to look for the silver lining, they are moving right ahead. I do have a few pictures in here just to update. You can see and they are giving site tours. Go to the provorriverdelta.us. They've got a link there you can schedule. And I don't know if it's on weekdays, but I know on Saturdays they do site tours. So and they would love to have anybody who wants to get out and see that, to take people around and show them what's going on, to get the public involved. This is a picture, obviously, of recent excavation, but also the swamp mats. One thing that they are having issues with, just a few, pictures just showing through there, is reestablishment of Phragmites and other invasive and noxious weeds. So this kind of gives you an idea of the hotspots of Phragmites. So that's kind of looking at the delta off of Melissa's phone. You can see where the hotspots are. The problem that they're having is that they've revegetated a lot of it. So they've paid a lot of money, they've planted a lot of plants, and now we have Phragmites and other weeds coming up through there. And so they're trying to dial in their control methods. So they're out there with backpack sprayers and possibly with sponges they tried mechanical removal, pulling by hand, shovels. They're trying to get that all figured out, what's going to be the most effective way, but also without causing any issues to remove the noxious weeds. So back on the Delta, that's, moving right along. They are having to irrigate a little bit to try to keep some of the plants that we planted there, to keep them from dying this year. But it's moving right along. Things look good all in all. Just, no one's surprised that Phragmites is popping up where it is. It is what it is. That's why it's an invasive species. Real fast update. We're going ahead with the Northern Pike telemetry study. The only hiccup that we're hitting right now is pretty much what everyone else in a lot of industries. We're just supply and demand issues. And so we're trying to just procure our submersible underwater receivers. But we have a line on a few different ones that we're trying to get, but things are moving right along, and we're hoping we will start having people on the ground with the telemetry study here in July. That's when we're hoping to have it start. And then hopefully by this time next year, we'll have a good idea of movements and other things like that for the first year. But as soon as we can get this supply and demand, issue, well, the demand's not the issue, it's the supply issue, figured out, then, it'll go a lot more smoothly. So other than that, that's what I got.
Okay. Thanks, Russ. Any questions from the group? Okay. Eric, how do you, we're standing at 11:30. How do you want to proceed with the remainder of the agenda items?
I can be like two quick minutes. I just want to point out Walkara Way is moving ahead. We've got an RFP with at Forestry, Fire and State Lands. They're doing final review of that. It's going to go out. It's going to be the first RFP will cover all of the design, land acquisition or easements, permits, fencing design, trail design, engineering work, and then it'll go to subsequent construction and bid documents, and then it'll go to subsequent an RFP for the construction of all of that. So that's happening right now. We do have this big cleanup that's up there on the right. That's going to happen on July 13th. Everybody's welcome. We're partnering with the Utah Valley Chamber of Commerce, expecting somewhere in the 100 to 200 people down at Lincoln Point. So that should be really fun to get that cleaned up. We're looking at putting in some applications for Habitat Council in this upcoming year. These are the locations that we're considering. So if you have non-improved access points that you would like to see additional improvements besides just Lincoln, Sweetland, Race, and Mesita, and potentially Mulberry Beach, let us know, because we're going to kind of start drafting together that application. Phragmites is on schedule. We've got enough funding this year to treat the entire shoreline. We also secured some funding for an extra marsh master. And the point behind that is so that we can always have 2 marsh masters working at all times. Just the maintenance alone is oftentimes taking one of them offline. So if we can have 2 of them out working 5 days a week at least, we can always have one being rotated out for maintenance. This year's Utahlake legislation was an appropriation of $9.8 million that I'm sure most of you heard about. 850,000 of that is for shoreline restoration improvements and improvements. We've got a RFP for that as well. That's going to come out of Forestry Fire and State Lands. Are the ones that are managing the fiscal on this. 5.4 million includes $1 million of feeding, cattle feeding operation. So it's just kind of the management of that grazing operation. So we lump that into one, and it includes all the fencing, grazing, trails and facilities, trailheads and so forth. 2.6 for marina upgrades or enhancements. Likewise, the RFP should be getting posted here shortly, and that'll be for development of marinas, enhancement of marinas that we have and potentially that we don't have yet. So lastly, algae remediation. Division of Water Quality is helping on this one with Forestry Fire and State Lands as the fiscal to do a couple more pilot treatments like we did last summer, really close monitoring, and then also an evaluation of all the potential treatments that there are out there today, kind of an evaluation of technology that can be catered to Utahlake so that we have a treatment plan going forward. So that'll be kind of a separate contract as well. The Utahlake Authority, just wanted to mention it because it's being reviewed by both the legislative interim committees as well as the water user task force. There's a whole slew of 10 different subcommittees on that that are kind of reviewing each different element that probably needs to be considered. And that will likely be revisited at the upcoming 2022 legislative session. So we just had an awesome Utahlake regatta this last Saturday, most boats ever that they've had before. And so the Utahleycommission sponsored that. It was really fun. I got a chance to come down to the dinner portion of it and just see this enormous crowd of sailors for the barbecue side and big awards ceremony. It was a lot of fun. Super exciting to see that many people kind of down here enjoying Utahlake. So thanks, Soren.
I can make this brief as far as communication goes. Check them around so they can hear me though. For communications, we just wanted to share a couple quick things around outreach. One, that the life jacket loaner program is proceeding forward. Last year, there were about 200 life jackets and about $1,700 donated. Right now, we just got the station design, the agreements with marina and access point managers, and they've all been working with us on that to be able to install these. Wilkinson's is Wilkinson's is sponsoring a commemorative plaque on each of these to do so in honor of Priscilla Binkowski and Sophia Hernandez, the two girls who lost their lives, whose families we're partnering with on this. And then we're also currently seeking a sponsor for materials and construction of the stations. So hopefully in the coming weeks during the summer, this should be able to be finalized. And then just 3 other items to update you on. Currently, we're in the middle of the Utahlake scavenger hunt. There's 5 days left, including today. You can
Not too late to sign up.
Not too late, and there's still plenty of chances to win one of 2 daily prizes each day, or the grand prize is 2 inflatable paddle boards. And we partnered with Al Sporting Goods for all of the prizes, and the June Sucker program partnered with us on covering some of these costs and raising awareness. So there's, by the end of it, there will be over 150 different missions that teams can choose from. And those vary from, some were submitted from partners like the June Sucker program or DWR or the Provo River Delta Project. Central Utah Water submitted some as well. And some of those are educational and some of them are just fun activities. Like one of my personal favorites is how many team members can you fit on a paddleboard at once? And so they have to take a picture of how many of their team members they were able to fit on a paddleboard. So some fun ones, a great fun and educational way to get to know the lake. So it's a lot of fun. The other 2 things coming hopefully in the next month or so, we actually are going to be migrating Utahleycommission.org to Utahlake.org. And a thank you to the Saratoga Springs Owners Association for that. That was their domain. We met with them and they agreed that Utahlake.org makes a little bit more sense with our agency than theirs. And so we now own that domain and we're just in the process of refining and improving our SEO and trying to make that a smooth transition. And last but not least, Eric mentioned the sailboat regatta. We are working on a few different outreach videos with a former intern who's quite skilled in that area. And so he recorded the footage of the regatta and is going to make one of those, and we're working on a few other ideas as well. So hopefully we'll have some more outreach tools to be able to share with you all in the coming days. That's what we got.
As those RFPs move to contracts, I'll send out an invite to the technical committee to see if we have interest in participation on the development of those plans, because they're really cool projects, and I think it'd be good to get some feedback from this group to how they move ahead.
Excellent. Thank you, Eric and Sam. Any questions for them? Comments? Okay, we'll move to our roundtable just briefly here. Any technical committee members go around the room? Any comments, updates?
None in this room. Anybody on the call?
Okay. No comments for the roundtable. How about our comments from the general public? Okay. Excellent. Well, I guess with that, just remind everyone that our next technical committee meeting is August 11th at 10 o'clock, planning on the state park again. I will make it a point to be there. Hopefully it'll be a little easier. And then Eric, can you remind us all when the next governing board meeting is?
It's next week on Thursday, the 17th.
Okay. Excellent.
7:38.
Okay. Thank you. I guess with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, second.
And a second.
Okay. If everyone's in agreement.